answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So once President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney got done with the pleasantries and went through the performative to buy or sell Canada exchange, and then Trump offered his pronouncements about the United States not needing or wanting Canadian cars, steel, aluminum, lumber, etc. It got right down to it. Anything that Carney can say that will get you to move off of your position on Canadian tariffs at present.
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is.
It's just the way it is, but that isn't the way it is. Because meanwhile, back at the ranch, testifying before the House, was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who had this to say about where the administration is in negotiating with the key 18 trading partners, minus one.
There are 18 very important trading relationships. We are currently negotiating with 17 of those trading partners. China, we have not engaged in negotiations with as of yet. So I expect that we can see a substantial reduction in the tariffs that we are being charged, as well as non-tariff barriers, currency manipulation, and the subsidies of both labor and capital investment. So that is proceeding very well. Many of our trading partners have approached us with very good offers, and we are in the process of renegotiating those.
Right. So the rhetorical positioning of the president in the context of wanting to show everybody who's boss again, and then the actual activity that is ongoing with Bessent and Jameson Greer and others to negotiate deals because of the top 18 trading partners. Canada is necessarily one of them. And the only odd man out with Bessent's testimony in the House was China. And that is now, at least potentially, no longer an odd man out when Bessent announced later yesterday that, in fact, he will be meeting with representatives of the Chinese Communist Party in Switzerland this weekend to hopefully, in his words, de-escalate as a pathway to a deal. Okay. For more on all of that in the context of a parallel track that is running, which is the big, beautiful bill on tax and spend, and, Phil Kerpen argues, regulatory policy. Phil Kerpen, President of the American Commitment, principal of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, joins us. Phil, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.
So, how does the state of play with respect to trade impact the big, beautiful bill, do you think, in terms of both its the tax and spend side of it?
Well, I think it creates a lot more urgency to get it done sooner rather than later. We've got this massive kind of negative weight and uncertainty on the economy because of the tariff outlook. And by the way, not that I'm keeping track, but I am keeping track. We're on day 28 of the 90-day pause. And so we've almost lost a third of this pause already. We've got 0 deals so far. They keep saying they're close to all these deals, but I'd feel a lot better if they had 1 or 2 actually consummated at this point, with almost a third of the time gone. And so when you've got the prospect of those very large taxes on imports snapping back into place, it's really critical that we get the tax cuts done for the larger economy. Of course, trade is a very significant component to the economy. If you look at imports plus exports, it's almost 30% of the economy. But the tax bill touches 100% of the economy, and so the stakes are even a little bit higher for that, and it's especially important and to offset, the potential costs associated with those tariffs with having new tax cuts, or at least extending the old ones so we don't have tax hikes on top of the tariffs. And, I remind Republicans when I speak with them that the Republican Party platform that they ratified at the last convention expressly says that any revenue from tariffs will be used to cut other taxes. And so, I mean, that's got to be part of the thinking on this also. If these tariffs are actually going to be in place for any significant period of time, you don't want that to be a net increase in the tax burden. You want to make sure that you offset it elsewhere.
Wow. Well, when is there? I mean, a lot of people feel like President Trump and House Ways and Means Committee is dragging their feet on the tax bill. When do you expect it to come to fruition?
Well, we've got a lot of the pieces of it now that have been released. A lot of the committees have already done their work, including the Judiciary Committee, which has a really good regulatory reform components in there, including the Rein Act, a bill I've been trying to pass for the last 15 years or so. So a lot of the work has been done, but the big sort of question is what's behind the curtain at the Ways and Means Committee, because they've got the tax title, which is the big one. And they've delayed, and they don't seem to have agreement at the moment. I was thinking we'd see it maybe last week, maybe this week. It looks like maybe next week now. They've still got the same kind of basic problems that they had before. And the other one we haven't seen is the Energy and Commerce Committee, which would have any Medicaid changes, which have also kind of pathetically become controversial among Republicans. And I say kind of pathetically because, you have all these headlines about the savage cuts and the deep cut. There are no cuts. Medicaid spending goes up every single year under the House budget, and yet this idea of, a program that's up 50% in the last 5 years, they want it to only grow 3% a year instead of 5% a year in the next few years. And the media and the Democrats act like, this is the largest cut they've ever seen. So it's bizarro world. And those are the two biggest committees. Those are the ones we still haven't heard from. And so, they're trying to get they need essentially consensus to move something through the House because Thomas Massey, who I love, by the way, votes no on everything. And they've got such a narrow majority, I think they can afford to lose two other Republicans because of a couple of Democratic vacancies with some deaths. They actually have a little bit more wiggle room than they did before, but still, they need to get almost total consensus. You've got a bunch of Republicans in high-tax blue states that want to raise the SALT cap. That's very expensive from a cost estimate standpoint, and so they still have a lot of moving pieces to kind of figure out. I think that once they get agreement, once we see something, and that could shake loose any time, I think it can move very quickly because if they can get through the House with the narrow majority that they have and get that done, the original goal was Memorial Day. Maybe that slips a little bit past that. The Senate has a bigger majority than the House right now, and I think that in the compromises that it may take to get this through the House will probably be, acceptable to the senators who are in doubt. And so I still think that we might see this whole thing move relatively quickly once the curtain is lifted and we see the text out of these two committees that still haven't reported.
Well, it's going to have to move quickly because then it'll get savaged with all the sorts of hysteria that you're describing surrounding a Medicaid program that is not being cut. And then people will get weak-kneed about it, too, and then it could languish. So, once you unveil, you gotta run the gauntlet, it seemed to me.
Well,
but
there may be very little, unfortunately, in terms of Medicaid reforms because of the Republicans who've gone skittish in the face of these attacks. And so it may not accomplish very much on the spending side, this bill. And, that I think is going to be that's going to rub a lot of, if that's how this turns out, that's going to rub a lot of conservatives the wrong way, and they might take a walk on it. And that would kind of be a worst-case scenario because I don't think, a lot of people say, hey, if Republicans don't get this done, the whole thing's going to expire and the child credit's going to be cut in half and the standard deduction's going to be cut in half and all the rates go up and small businesses get hammered. And I don't think it would quite go that way. I think Republicans can't get on the same page. You'll see a deal with Democrats. And it could be even worse in many ways than the thing just expiring because they'll want, a bunch of different tax hikes and different things, and it'll be, class warfare stuff. And, but I think, like the child credit will probably get extended no matter what because the Democrats will agree to that. And so I think the worst case scenario is not an expiration. It's actually, Republicans can't get consensus, and then the Democrats get empowered, and we get a bipartisan bill that could be really ugly.
I know Trump has poo-pooed the idea, but is there still a disagreement among House Republicans about increasing the top bracket? Is that you mentioned the SALT deduction? I saw from Unleash Prosperity it's like 5 of the 50 targeted House members are in SALT states, if you will. So this is really a sop to Democrats on the net. So it's bad policy and bad politics, number one, to reward high tax states, and number two, just because of the distribution of the members of Congress I just mentioned. But are those two matters still sticking points among Republicans?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting. This guy Lawler from New York, who, I think there are two, I don't have the chart in front of me right now. I think there were 6 Republican districts in the top 50 SALT districts and 2 in the top 25. But one of them is this guy from New York, Mike Lawler, who's running for governor. And he, for all of the last Congress, his ask was, hey, double the SALT cap for married. So there's not a marriage penalty. Instead of being $10,000 for everyone, make it $20,000 for married. And I think most conservatives said, hey, we think it should be 0. We don't think SALT should be deductible. We don't think we should have, this transfer between states embedded in the tax code. But if it's going to be at 10 for single, we're okay with 20 for married because we don't like marriage penalties. And sort of people were kind of getting comfortable with that. And Lawler went down to Mar-a-Lago in the transition period. And he went to Trump and he said, this is my ask. I want a 20,000 cap for married. And Trump said, yeah, no problem. We'll put it in the bill. And it was very un-Trumpian of him to agree like that. And this guy Lawler said, okay, well, you know what I actually want is 200,000. So he just immediately and massively moved the goalpost, having been granted what he'd been trying to get done for all of the previous Congress. And now he's pushing for, I think he's come down a little from the 200, but he's saying I need 75,000 or something. So they still have a challenge on that particular issue. And there's something crazy about the way that issue plays out, by the way, because all the liberals who are always saying we want higher taxes on the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. Well, in 2017, that's kind of what they did, right? The only people who got tax hikes in the Trump tax reform bill were rich people in blue states who had very high state and local tax bills. Essentially, about 8% of people in the highest tax states had net tax hikes because of the capping of SALT. But I thought the Democrats were supposed to be in favor of taxing rich people, but it turns out they're against it if it's their rich people in their states. And so, this has become a thing. And, of course, you've got some Republicans in these places. Not a lot, but if you've got a tiny, tiny House majority, then they become empowered, even if there aren't a lot of them.
You mentioned Medicaid, and we talked about this a bit earlier in the week, too, because of Josh Hawley's about-face on it, and just how nonsensical this whole thing is, including the perverse incentives that the program presents as currently constituted in terms of federal versus state spend in this joint federal-state program. You mentioned this, too. I saw in a tweet where you're talking about the idea of higher reimbursement rates for the non-disabled working age population versus the disabled population, which makes no sense. But there's something else, too, that Trump proposed in the budget, not nearly the slash and burn that the D.C. press corps has been describing, as you said, but that is basically kicking the Section 8 program back to the states as well, reducing the federal allocation by 40% and then kicking back to the states to tailor their own state and local subsidized housing programs. That would be really interesting, and it could be a wonderful reform to a completely corrupt and destructive program. We're talking about Section 8. What are the chances that something like that survives?
That's not going to be in this big, beautiful bill. That'll be kind of probably on a separate track, maybe in the appropriations process. So we'll see. I mean, they're starting the next budget process before we're done with the previous one. But maybe that could be done in reconciliation under this next budget process as a way to get it around the Democratic filibuster. So I don't think that's in play for this current bill, but maybe for the next one or maybe through appropriations. And I'm totally in favor of it. Look, I mean, if you look at what we did with the old aid to families with dependent children in the 90s when it was changed to TANF, there were two keys to that being so successful. One was that work requirements were added to the program, which, if you want people to get off of government programs because for the right reason, not because you're booting them to die in the street, but because they're getting on the ladder of economic opportunity and they don't need those programs anymore, then work requirements are essential. Because what you want to tell the people on these programs is, look, you've got to be working or in job training if you want to get government assistance, and that will help you get off government assistance. You can't be sitting at home. And so work requirements. But the other part of it were cutting the federal strings and the bureaucracy and turning it over to the states so they could run these programs and try different things and have the flexibility to be successful. And that's the game plan. That's the template. Remember, Clinton vetoed welfare reform twice before he signed it the third time. And when he signed it the third time, it was because all 50 governors signed a letter saying that they wanted it. And it's very unfortunate that the Democratic Party has moved so far away from that, and it's no longer a consensus position to add work requirements and to cut the federal requirements and block grant these programs, because what we did for cash welfare, and by the way, it needs to be done again for cash welfare also, because it's sort of crept back in the other direction under, sort of the welfare reform in reverse that we had under Obama and Biden. But we should do it for cash welfare. We should do it for housing. We should do it for food stamps. We should do it for Medicaid. It's a template that works. And by the way, it's a huge political winner. You ask about work requirements, they poll 75 or 80%. People agree that you need to have them. And they actually benefit the people in these programs to be doing something productive all day long. If you can't find work, then to be in job training and to be moving in that direction. And so I think that combined with giving the states the flexibility and the power to run these programs is critical. But also to the point you made, and I know I'm rambling a little, but states have to have skin in the game. There has to be a meaningful state share of funding in these programs, because otherwise they have no incentive to police eligibility and to prevent fraud. It's just free money from Uncle Sam. And so that's one of the reasons the Medicaid expansion has been such a disaster, because when it's 90 to 100% federal funds, the states don't care who's on the rolls. And so you have millions of ineligible people that are getting benefits.
And which is why it's unconscionable that some Republicans who call themselves conservatives are unwilling to spend the political capital to address this and just lay it out like you did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that difficult to communicate, so I don't know why they're running scared on it. And by the way, if you get millions of ineligible people off the Medicaid rolls, that is a huge help and a huge benefit to the truly needy that are in that program, because there are only so many doctors, okay? If you're trying to get in to see a doctor who takes Medicaid patients, I mean, good luck. A lot of them don't take new patients because they're already full. And if you have millions of people who are ineligible who are on those rolls, you get a lot of people who are truly needy, okay, who can't find a primary care doctor. So every time they're sick, they need to lose a whole day sitting around an emergency room, which, by the way, costs a fortune for the taxpayers that are paying the bill. And so we can make Medicaid a lot better for the people that are supposed to be on it by getting all the people who are not off the roll.
Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment, principal of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity as well. Phil, thank you as always.
All right, have a good one, guys.
You too, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
This Mother's Day, give Mom something that shines as bright as she does. Hi, it's Mike Gallagher. Roland's Jewelers is the perfect place for a gift to make Mother's Day unforgettable. Roland's has such a beautiful selection of jewelry.